Water doesn't negotiate, it follows the grade. For 7 years, the HOA had been routing 38 acres of parking lot and rooftop runoff through a 12-inch pipe into the natural swale along my northern boundary. No county permit, no drainage easement, no notification to me. My swale was built for hillside flow. They gave it a development. I documented every flood. I objected twice, certified mail. Twice they responded with the same phrase, established community infrastructure practice. So I pulled the county ordinance, section 12.4, subsection 6. If the discharge is unauthorized and you've provided written notice, you have the right to redirect it back toward its origin. No court order required. Just an approved engineering plan. I hired a hydrologist. She modeled the redirection pathway. The grade ran 1.67%, 180 feet, straight to the clubhouse foundation. I submitted the plan Monday. The county approved it Thursday. Saturday night it rained 1.8 inches. Sunday morning, 14 inches of standing water against the clubhouse foundation wall. The forum had 340 replies before noon. The board president resigned Sunday morning. The new interim president called my attorney at 1 p.m. The first thing she said was, "No contest." Hold on for a second. Before we get into this story, tell me where you're tuning in from and make sure to hit like and subscribe for more content like this. Water had been moving through the swale along Glenn Harker's northern boundary since before he was born. The channel was shallow and consistent, 18 inches deep at its center line, 4 feet wide at the banks, running west along the base of the hillside from a natural collection point at the property's northeastern corner to a county detention pond 800 feet away. It had been there when Glenn's father bought the property in 1978, and it had been there for decades before that, documented in county survey records as a natural drainage feature of the hillside's watershed, the kind of shallow, graded channel that forms over generations as seasonal water follows the path of least resistance through permeable soil and establishes its own geometry. Glenn had walked it the first week he moved onto the property and had understood immediately what it was and what it did. A civil engineer's eye, seeing the hydraulic story in the landform the way a surveyor sees a property line in the terrain. He had managed it for 46 years, with the understated attention of someone who understood natural drainage systems well enough to know that the correct intervention was usually the smallest one. He cleared debris after significant storms, branches, leaf accumulation, the occasional rock displaced by bank erosion, and restabilized the bank at 2 locations where the soil was soft enough to slump after heavy events. He had reinforced the bank at those locations in 1983, with a combination of native plantings and shallow stone placement, the kind of bioengineering approach that his professional work had taught him was more durable than concrete in a natural channel. The stabilized sections had held for 43 years without requiring additional work. The swale had carried stormwater west to the detention pond through every rainfall event in that period without flooding, without surcharging, without depositing water anywhere it was not supposed to go. He had documented it from the beginning. The drainage logbook was a bound record book, 1 entry per significant rainfall event, more than half an inch at his rain gauge, with columns for date, rainfall amount, swale flow observation, bank condition, outfall condition at the detention pond connection, and anomalies. The first entry was dated October 1978, 3 weeks after he moved onto the property. Rainfall 0.7 inches, swale flow moderate, bank stable, outfall clear, no anomalies. The logbook for 1978 through 2016 ran to 4 volumes, the entries consistent and unremarkable in the way that a well-functioning natural systems documentation was always unremarkable. Water arrived, water moved through the channel, water reached the detention pond, banks remained stable, no anomalies. The same entry, in varying amounts, for 38 years. He had spent 30 years in stormwater systems engineering for the state's infrastructure division, designing, reviewing, and inspecting drainage systems for highway and commercial development projects across the northern counties. The work had given him a specific and practical understanding of what impervious surfaces did to a watershed. Parking lots, roof lines, internal roads, surfaces that in a natural landscape would absorb or slow rainfall, converted to surfaces that shed it immediately and at velocity. A development with significant impervious coverage could increase the stormwater runoff volume from its footprint by a factor of 3 to 5 during a significant rainfall event. The additional volume had to go somewhere. Where it went was a function of the drainage infrastructure the development built, and whether that infrastructure was sized correctly for the impervious load it was designed to handle. Millbrook Commons had been built on the hillside immediately east of his property in 2014. He had watched the construction from his northern pasture, the grading, the road installation, the parking lot paving, the roofline work on the 220 units. He had attended the County Planning Commission's public comment session for the development in 2012 and had reviewed the stormwater management plan filed with the county. The plan described a retention basin on the development's eastern side, designed to capture and attenuate runoff from the development's impervious surfaces before releasing it to the county's downstream drainage system at a controlled rate. Glenn had reviewed the basin's sizing calculations in the public filing. He had noted in his own records that the basin appeared to be sized at the lower range of adequacy for the impervious load, not clearly undersized, but without the margin that conservative stormwater engineering typically recommended for developments at that elevation, where rainfall intensity during convective events could exceed the design storm parameters by 20 to 30%. He had written a comment letter to the Planning Commission saying so. The Commission had acknowledged the letter, noted it in the public record, and approved the development's stormwater plan without modification. Glenn had filed the Commission's acknowledgement in his drainage records and returned to his property work. The development opened in late 2014. He watched the retention basin perform during the 2015 and 2016 wet seasons from his northern pasture observation point, a location on the high ground of his property where the hillside's eastern face was visible and the basin's outlet structure could be seen releasing flow during rainfall events. In 2015, the basin performed within its design parameters during moderate events, but showed signs of surcharging during 2 higher intensity events in October and November, the outlet releasing at maximum capacity. While the basin level continued to rise, the spillway activated twice. He noted both observations in his drainage logbook under a new section he labeled Millbrook Commons Basin, Performance Observations. In 2016, the basin surcharged 3 times, the spillway activating each time, and on one occasion in December, Glenn observed overflow running along the development's eastern perimeter in an uncontrolled sheet flow path before dissipating in the natural vegetation at the hillside's base. He wrote to the development's then property manager in December 2016, a courtesy notification, not a complaint, just a professional communication from an adjacent landowner with stormwater engineering experience, noting that the retention basin was showing signs of inadequate capacity and that a capacity review might be warranted before the heavier events of the coming year. The property manager acknowledged the letter and said the board would review it. He did not receive a follow-up. He continued his observations. In the spring of 2017, a contractor appeared on the development's western perimeter, the side adjacent to Glenn's northern boundary, and spent 3 days installing what Glenn could see from the northern pasture was a concrete structure of some kind at the hillside's base. He could not see the full installation detail from his observation point. He noted it in his logbook. Contractor activity, western perimeter, concrete installation, date range, purpose unknown. He had not been notified. He had not been asked for access to his property for the installation. He had not received any communication from the development's board or management about work on the adjacent boundary. The first significant rainfall of the 2017 wet season arrived in September, 1.8 inches over 6 hours, a moderate event that the swale had handled dozens of times in the previous 38 years without producing standing water on the northern pasture. Glenn walked the swale the morning after, the same post-storm inspection routine he had followed since 1978. Start at the northeastern collection point, walk west to the detention pond outfall, observe bank condition and flow residue at each section. He was 50 feet into the walk when he saw the standing water. It was at the low point of the northern pasture, approximately 120 feet south of the swale's center line, an area that had never held standing water in his ownership, that the topography put above the swale's overflow elevation, that had no hydraulic pathway connecting it to the swale's normal flow under any condition Glenn had observed in 38 years. He stood and looked at it. Approximately 4,000 square feet of standing water, 2 to 4 inches deep, the ground saturated beneath it. He looked at the swale. The channel itself showed signs of recent high flow, debris deposited on the banks above the normal flow line, silt on the bank face at the upper flow mark. Flow marks significantly higher than anything Glenn had recorded in a 1.8-inch event. He walked east along the swale toward the collection point. He found the concrete structure at the swale's eastern end, a berm, approximately 18 inches high and 6 feet wide, constructed of formed concrete, with a pipe penetration through the berm's base discharging into the swale from the east. The pipe was 12 inches in diameter. He crouched at the pipe outlet and looked at the discharge residue, fine silt, and the debris characteristic of impervious surface runoff, not the organic material and soil that characterized natural hillside flow. He looked at the berm's eastern face. A channel had been cut in the fill on the development's side, redirecting what had been the development's retention basin overflow path into the pipe and through the berm into the swale. He stood up and looked at what he was looking at. A 12-inch pipe penetration through a concrete berm, discharging the development's impervious surface runoff into a natural swale that had been designed by geology and managed by him for 38 years to handle hillside flow only. The additional volume from 220 units of parking lots, roads, and roof lines, the impervious surface load he had reviewed in 2012 and noted as marginally sized in the retention basin, had been rerouted onto his property through a structure he had not been asked about, had not consented to, and had not been notified existed. He walked back to the farmhouse. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at his 2017 logbook. He wrote the date and the rainfall figure and the observation in full, the standing water, the high flow marks, the concrete berm, the pipe penetration, the discharge residue characterization. He wrote it with the precision of a civil engineer, documenting a site condition that would matter in a proceeding, not because he had yet decided to initiate one, but because his professional instinct was that accurate documentation at the time of discovery was always worth more than reconstructed documentation afterward. Then he drove to the county planning office and checked the permit index for the development's western perimeter drainage modification. He asked the permit desk to search under the development's address and parcel number for any stormwater or drainage modification permit filed in 2016 or 2017. The search took 4 minutes. The permit clerk showed him the results. No permit for a drainage modification on the development's western perimeter. No permit for a berm installation. No permit for a pipe discharge structure adjacent to a natural drainage feature. The 2014 development permit and the stormwater management plan were in the file. The 2017 modification was not. He drove back to the property and called Paula. She answered on the second ring. He described the swale, the standing water, the concrete berm, the pipe discharge, the impervious surface runoff characteristics of what had come through it. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. Did they have a county permit for the diversion structure? He said, no. He said he had checked the permit index that afternoon. No permit. She was quiet for a moment, the specific quality of silence that a lawyer with an environmental compliance background produces when she has just heard that an unpermitted stormwater discharge structure has been installed on her father's property boundary without notification or consent, and when she understands the regulatory and property rights implications of that combination in a way that the person who installed it clearly did not. Then she said, I'll drive up Saturday. He said the guest room was ready and the drainage logbook was on the kitchen table. After they hung up, he sat at the table with the logbook open to the September entry and thought about the swale, the 46 years of unremarkable entries, the consistent record of a natural system functioning correctly under the loads it was designed to handle. He thought about the 12-inch pipe and the concrete berm and the impervious surface runoff that had been sitting in the northern pasture that morning as standing water on ground that had never held standing water in his ownership. He thought about what 220 units of parking lot and roofline discharge did to a natural swale during a 3-inch event. He had spent 30 years calculating exactly that kind of number, and he did not need to sit down with a calculator to know that the swale's capacity would be exceeded by a significant margin. He had seen the high flow marks on the bank. He had seen the standing water on the pasture. The numbers were in the field already. He just had to measure them. He closed the logbook, made dinner, and waited for Saturday. The retention basin had been undersized from the day it was built. Glenn had noted it in his 2012 comment letter to the Planning Commission, not as a certainty, but as a professional observation that the basin's design capacity sat at the lower range of adequacy for the impervious load the development would generate. The Planning Commission had approved the stormwater plan without modification, and the developer had built the basin to the approved specifications, which meant the basin was built to a specification that Glenn's engineering judgment had flagged as marginal and that the first 2 wet seasons confirmed as insufficient. The development's 220 units covered the hillside with the impervious surfaces that modern residential development always covered hillsides with. Parking areas serving 1.4 vehicles per unit, internal access roads connecting the parking areas to the county highway, roof lines aggregating approximately 180,000 square feet of non-absorbent surface, and the decorative hardscape of walkways and entry plazas that added another 12,000 square feet. Total impervious coverage, approximately 38 acres of surface that shed rainfall immediately and at velocity, compared to the pre-development hillside that had absorbed a significant fraction of that same rainfall into soil and vegetation before releasing the remainder as controlled runoff over hours rather than minutes. The basin had been designed to handle the runoff from that 38-acre impervious footprint during a 10-year storm event, the standard design parameter for residential development drainage in the county. The 10-year storm at the hillside's elevation produced approximately 2.8 inches of rainfall in a 6-hour period. The basin's design capacity was sized for that volume with a 10% safety margin. What the design had not fully accounted for, and what Glenn's comment letter had noted as a concern, was the compounding effect of the hillside's natural contributing watershed, which drained to the same basin inlet from the uphill direction and added its own runoff volume on top of the development's impervious discharge. Combined, the natural watershed contribution and the impervious surface discharge during a 10-year event exceeded the basin's design capacity by approximately 25%. During higher intensity events, the kind that occurred 3 or 4 times per decade in the northern mountain foothills, the combined volume exceeded the capacity by 40 to 60%. In 2015, the basin had surcharged twice. In 2016, it had surcharged 3 times. The spillway activated on each occasion. And in December 2016, the spillway overflow had run along the development's eastern perimeter in an uncontrolled path that Glenn had observed from his northern pasture and documented in his logbook. The then president of the HOA board had received Glenn's courtesy letter about the basin's performance and had forwarded it to the HOA's facilities contractor with a note asking for an assessment. The contractor had assessed the retention basin in February 2017 and had produced a 1-page report recommending either basin expansion, estimated cost $38,000, including excavation, liner extension, and outlet structure modification, or installation of an overflow diversion to route excess capacity to an alternative discharge point. The contractor noted that a natural swale existed on the adjacent western property, and that a diversion to that swale could be accomplished with a berm and pipe installation for approximately $14,000. The board had voted in March 2017 to authorize the $14,000 diversion option. The vote was 4-1. The dissenting member was a retired hydrologist named Fenn, who had asked whether the adjacent property owner had been consulted and whether a county permit was required. The board's then president had said the modification was on the development's own perimeter and did not require adjacent owner consultation or a county permit for a drainage improvement. Fenn had voted no, written his objection in the meeting minutes, and left the board at the end of his term that year. The $14,000 modification had been contracted to a drainage contractor who had installed the concrete berm and pipe diversion in April 2017. 2 weeks of work, no county permit application filed, no notification to Glenn, no drainage easement recorded over his property. The contractor had done competent work within the scope of what he had been asked to do. The berm was correctly formed, and the pipe penetration was sealed. The diversion channel on the development side was graded appropriately. What the contractor had not been asked to evaluate, and what the HOA's board had not asked anyone to evaluate, was whether the natural swale on the adjacent property was capable of handling the additional discharge volume the diversion would introduce. The swale had been managing natural hillside flow for decades. The question of what it would do with 38 acres of impervious surface runoff on top of that was a stormwater engineering question, and no stormwater engineer had been asked it. The answer arrived in September 2017 in the form of 4,000 square feet of standing water on Glen's northern pasture and high flow marks on the swale bank above any level Glen had recorded in 38 years of documentation. Glen had written to the HOA in April 2018, 6 months after the first flooding event, after 3 additional events had produced standing water on the pasture with increasing frequency, and after he had fully documented the diversion structure's physical installation and its relationship to the flooding pattern. The letter was 4 paragraphs, certified mail, addressed to the board president. It described the diversion structure, documented its installation timeline against the onset of flooding, cited the absence of a county permit in the drainage index, and stated clearly that the structure was discharging impervious surface runoff onto his private property without his consent, without a recorded drainage easement, and without legal authorization. He requested that the diversion structure be removed and the natural drainage pattern restored within 60 days. The HOA's response came 3 weeks later under the then-president's signature. It described the 2017 modification as a drainage improvement project that benefited the broader watershed by utilizing an existing natural drainage feature for stormwater conveyance. It said the modification had been authorized by the board and implemented by a licensed drainage contractor. It did not address the absence of a county permit. It did not address the absence of a drainage easement. It did not address Glen's property rights or the flooding his letter had documented. It described the swale as an existing natural drainage feature in a way that implied the development had a right to use it because it existed, as though the existence of a natural channel on private property constituted a public drainage right for adjacent impervious surfaces. Glen had read the response at his kitchen table and written in his drainage logbook. HOA response received. Drainage improvement characterization. Permit absence not addressed. Easement absence not addressed. Flooding documentation not acknowledged. Record unchanged. He had filed the response behind his letter and continued documenting events. The flooding continued through 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. Glen's logbook entries accumulated with the patient precision of a man who had spent 30 years documenting hydrological conditions and who understood that a complete event record was the foundation of any proceeding. Each entry followed the same format: date, rainfall amount, peak swale flow observation, standing water area and depth on the northern pasture, bank condition, duration of standing water before absorption, and any structural damage observed. Most entries noted moderate flooding, 2,000 to 5,000 square feet of standing water, 2 to 6 inches deep, absorbing within 12 to 36 hours. 2 entries in 2020 noted water intrusion into the equipment storage outbuilding, a structure at the northern pasture's low point that had been above the flooding level in every event until 2020, when a combination of a high-intensity storm and saturated antecedent soil conditions produced a peak flow that raised the standing water to the outbuilding's floor elevation and pushed 2 inches of water under the door. Glen had documented both intrusions with photographs, a damage assessment, and repair cost notes. He had written a second objection letter to the HOA in October 2020, this one to Cheryl Voss, who had been board president since 2019. The second letter was more detailed than the first. It included the complete event log from 2017 through 2020, the 2 outbuilding intrusion incidents with repair costs, a summary of the permit index searches he had conducted in 2017 and again in 2020, confirming no permit had been filed for the modification, and a formal demand for removal of the diversion structure, restoration of the natural drainage pattern, and compensation for the documented property damage. He cited the county stormwater ordinance's provision prohibiting unauthorized discharge of impervious surface runoff onto private property. Cheryl's response arrived 2 weeks later. It was shorter than her predecessors, 2 paragraphs. The first said the drainage modification had been approved by the previous board as a necessary infrastructure improvement. The second said the swale had been in use as a drainage feature for the development's benefit since 2017, and that the arrangement was consistent with established community infrastructure practice. It did not cite a permit. It did not cite a drainage easement. It cited established community infrastructure practice, a phrase that had no legal content Glenn could identify in any ordinance or statute he was aware of. He had read it, written the date and response characterization in his logbook, and called Paula. She had said, "Keep documenting." He had kept documenting. Nadia Seff had joined the Millbrook Commons HOA board in the spring of 2022 as the board's budget and compliance member, a role that suited her background as a former county permit analyst, someone who had spent 8 years reviewing development permit applications for completeness and regulatory compliance. She had been a resident since 2016 and had watched the retention basin's performance from her unit's eastern-facing window with the professional attention of someone who recognized infrastructure that was operating outside its design parameters. She had joined the board specifically because she wanted to understand what the board knew about the basin situation and what, if anything, was being done about it. Her first month on the board, she had pulled the county's drainage permit file for the development. She had accessed the county's public permit database, searched under the development's parcel number, and reviewed every permit and compliance record in the file. The 2014 development permit was there. The stormwater management plan was there. The retention basin's as-built submission was there. The 2015 and 2016 county compliance inspection reports were there, both noting the basin's surcharge events and flagging the capacity question for follow-up, a follow-up that did not appear in the file. The 2017 drainage modification was not there. No permit application, no contractor submission, no county review, no modification to the approved stormwater management plan. Nothing. She had printed the search results, confirmed the absence, and written in her notebook, 2017 Western Perimeter Drainage Modification, no county permit, unauthorized modification to county-approved stormwater system, and below it, underlined, adjacent property, natural swale, check easement index. She had checked the county easement index under Glenn's parcel address. No drainage easement, no recorded right of discharge. She had written, no easement. Discharge is onto private property without authorization. Then she had emailed Cheryl. She said she had pulled the county drainage permit file and found no permit for the 2017 Western Perimeter Drainage Modification. She asked Cheryl to send her the permit number so she could locate the correct record. She said she wanted to confirm the modification was in regulatory compliance before the board's next meeting. Cheryl had called her the following morning and said the modification had been authorized by the previous board as a drainage improvement, and that the contractor had been licensed and competent, and that the board had considered the matter settled since 2017. Nadia had said she understood that, but asked again for the permit number. She needed to locate the county's record. Cheryl said the previous board's authorization was the relevant documentation and that the county's permit process was not applicable to a drainage improvement on the development's own perimeter. Nadia said she would follow up by email to confirm the permit situation in writing. She sent the follow-up email that evening, a single sentence confirming her earlier question, asking for the county permit number for the 2017 drainage modification. She said she had not been able to locate it in the public permit database and wanted to confirm she had the correct permit identifier. Cheryl did not reply. Nadia printed both emails, the original with its question and sent timestamp, and the follow-up with its timestamp and the blank space where a reply would have appeared, and added them to the folder she had started the day she pulled the permit file. The folder had 4 items: the printed search results showing no permit, the easement index search showing no recorded drainage right, and the 2 unanswered emails. She kept it in her bag. She had not yet decided what to do with what she had found. She was waiting to see whether Glenn would do something first, or whether another flooding season would produce an event significant enough to force the question. She was also watching Cheryl's management of the drainage situation with the specific attention of a former permit analyst who recognized the gap between what a board president believed about a regulatory situation and what the regulatory record actually said. The gap was documented in her folder. Sooner or later, she thought, someone was going to open it in a place where the gap mattered. She went to bed that Tuesday evening and left the folder on her desk. Outside, the retention basin was at capacity from the week's rainfall, the outlet releasing at its maximum rate, the overflow path through the concrete berm, and the 12-inch pipe running at full discharge into the natural swale on the adjacent property, moving west toward the county detention pond through a channel that had never been designed, never been asked, and never been permitted to carry it. Paula arrived Saturday at 8:15, the drive from the state capitol completed in the early morning quiet, before the weekend traffic built on the highway approach. She had been thinking about the drainage situation since Glenn's call Thursday evening. Not the flooding itself, which she had been aware of in general terms since the first events in 2017, but the specific combination of facts Glenn had described in this call. A second outbuilding intrusion, water on the floor again, and his voice carrying the particular quality it carried when he had been patient for a long time, and had reached the point where patience was no longer the correct response. She had handled environmental compliance matters for the state for 6 years before moving to private practice, and the regulatory framework for stormwater discharge on private property was a structure she understood precisely. She knew the county's stormwater ordinance. She knew the state's impervious surface discharge regulations. She knew what an unpermitted drainage modification discharging onto private property looked like from a regulatory standpoint, and she knew what the property owner's remedies were. What she did not yet have was the complete documentation, the full 7-year record that her father had been keeping in the drainage logbook, the HOA's written responses, the permit index confirmation, the county's 1982 drainage survey. She needed to sit with all of it before she called anyone. Glenn had the documentation on the kitchen table when she arrived. He had arranged it the way he arranged everything he wanted her to review, in chronological sequence, each item clearly labeled, the logbook open to the first event entry, and flagged at subsequent significant entries with paper clips. She poured coffee and sat down and began at the beginning. She read the drainage logbook first, from the first September 2017 entry forward, through the current season. She read it the way a compliance examiner reads a field record, not for narrative, but for pattern. The pattern was unambiguous. 38 years of unremarkable entries. Flow observed, bank stable, outfall clear, no anomalies, followed by a sudden and sustained departure beginning in September 2017, 2 months after the concrete berm's installation. Every significant rainfall event from that point produced standing water on the northern pasture. The standing water area and depth increased progressively through 2018 and 2019 as the accumulated soil saturation raised the baseline moisture level. The 2020 entries showed the first outbuilding intrusions. The current season's entries showed 3 moderate flooding events, and then the one Glenn had called about, a 2.4-inch event that had produced the largest standing water area yet documented, approximately 7,200 square feet, 4 to 6 inches deep, and a second outbuilding intrusion more significant than either of the 2020 events. Water under the door at 3 inches and spreading to the interior's low point before Glenn had sandbagged the threshold. She read the 2018 objection letter and the HOA's response. She read the 2020 objection letter and Cheryl's response. She placed both HOA responses side by side and read them together. Neither mentioned a permit, neither mentioned a drainage easement, neither addressed the flooding documentation. The first cited drainage improvement. The second cited established community infrastructure practice. Both were responses written by someone who believed that board authorization was equivalent to legal authorization, and that the existence of a natural feature on a neighbor's property implied a right to use it. She looked at the county's 1982 drainage survey, the certified document Glenn had pulled from the county's public survey archive in 2017, showing the swale as a natural drainage feature, channel geometry documented, contributing watershed boundaries marked, flow direction indicated, and in the survey notes at the bottom, natural drainage feature, no artificial modification, no recorded easement. The survey was 42 years old and had been sitting in the county's public record since the year Glenn's father bought the property. It documented the swale's pre-development condition with the authority of a certified county survey instrument. She read the county permit index search Glenn had run in 2017 and again in 2020, both showing the same result. The 2014 development permit, the approved stormwater management plan, the retention basin as-built submission, and no permit, no application, no record of any kind for a drainage modification on the development's western perimeter. She set all the documents down and looked at the full spread of the table for a moment. 7 years, 2 certified objection letters, no permit, no easement, an unpermitted structure discharging impervious surface runoff onto private property since April 2017, and a property owner who had been objecting in writing since April 2018 and had been dismissed twice by a board that had confused its own internal authorization with regulatory compliance. She picked up her phone and called Reed Calloway at noon. Reed had been in water drainage and property rights law for 26 years, the first 8 as counsel for the County Drainage Board, a background that gave him the institutional knowledge of drainage law from the regulatory side before he had moved to private practice. He understood the county's stormwater ordinance the way people understood regulatory frameworks they had helped administer, not as external rules to be researched, but as an operational system whose structure and intent were familiar from years of applying it. Paula had worked with him in 2 environmental compliance matters. She trusted his reading of drainage law specifically, and his understanding of property owner rights under the state's stormwater regulations generally. She gave him the summary in 10 minutes. He asked 5 questions: the year the berm was installed, and whether the installation was confirmed in the county's field inspection record, whether Glenn's objection letters had been sent certified mail, whether the logbook entries were contemporaneous or reconstructed after the events, whether Glenn had obtained the 1982 drainage survey through official county channels with certification, and whether the HOA's written responses had addressed the permit question at any point. The answers were 2017 confirmed in the county permit index, by absence, and in Glenn's own field documentation of the installation. Yes, both certified, all entries contemporaneous with each event, as Glenn's logbook notation practice confirmed. Yes, county certified copy obtained through the public survey archive. And no, neither response had mentioned the permit question. Reed said he would pull the full county drainage and permit record and call back by the following Thursday. He asked Paula to scan and send everything on the table. She said she would send it before end of day. She spent the afternoon scanning, the logbook's significant event entries flagged by Glenn, the 2 objection letters with certified mail receipts attached, both HOA responses, the 1982 drainage survey, the permit index search results from 2017 and 2020, and Glenn's field photographs from the current season's outbuilding intrusion event. She organized the scan with a cover document listing each item, the key facts at the top, and the non-permit and non-easement confirmation highlighted where Reed would see it before he opened anything else. Reed called Thursday at 1:30 in the afternoon. Glenn and Paula were on speaker at the kitchen table, the same configuration they had used for Owen Pruitt and Cal, and every attorney call that required both of them present. Reed reported in 3 parts. The first part was the violation record. The 2017 modification had been installed without a county stormwater permit, in direct violation of the county's Stormwater Ordinance Section 12.4, which required a permit for any artificial modification to a natural drainage feature or any new point of discharge from an impervious surface drainage system onto an adjacent property. The permit requirement was not ambiguous or technical. It was a plain requirement that any contractor performing drainage work of this kind was expected to know. The HOA's contractor had either known and not complied, or had not known and had performed permitted work without appropriate due diligence. Neither explanation changed the regulatory status. The modification was unpermitted and had been unpermitted since the day it was installed. The discharge was additionally prohibited under the state's impervious surface discharge regulations, which the county's ordinance incorporated by reference. The state regulations prohibited the discharge of impervious surface stormwater runoff onto adjacent private property without a recorded drainage easement granting that right. No drainage easement existed in the county's easement index for Glenn's parcel. Reed had searched under both Glenn's parcel number and the development's parcel number and found no easement of any kind. No drainage right, no flowage right, no recorded instrument of any description that gave the development a legal right to discharge its runoff onto Glenn's property. The HOA had been discharging impervious surface stormwater onto private property without permit, without easement, and over the property owner's documented written objection for 7 years. The second part was the damage record. Glenn's logbook constituted a professional-grade documentation of the flooding damage, contemporaneous entries by a licensed civil engineer with 30 years of stormwater systems experience, covering every significant rainfall event from 2017 to the current season. The two outbuilding intrusion events were documented with photographs, dates, and repair cost records. Reed said the damage claim was well-founded and well-documented. He said the 7-year duration compounded the HOA's exposure significantly. The third part was the property owner protection clause, and Reed described it with the directness of a drainage attorney who had administered the provision from the regulatory side and knew its scope precisely. The County Stormwater Ordinance's Section 12.4, subsection 6, the Property Owner Protection Clause, stated that any property owner who had been subjected to unauthorized artificial discharge from an adjacent impervious surface drainage system and who had provided documented written notice to the discharging party had the right to reject the unauthorized discharge and to redirect it back toward its point of origin, subject to county drainage inspector approval of the redirection plan. The right did not require a court order. It did not require a formal administrative proceeding beyond the county drainage inspector's approval of the redirection plan. It required 3 things: unauthorized discharge, documented written notice, and an approved redirection plan. Glenn had the first 2. The third was an engineering and approval question. Reed said he was engaging Vivian Cross, a state-certified hydrologist and stormwater engineer with 22 years of field experience, to produce the drainage analysis. He wanted 4 things from Vivian: the current discharge volume from the development's diversion at the berm's pipe outlet during representative storm events, the swale's natural carrying capacity, and the degree to which the artificial discharge exceeded it. The engineering design for a portable redirection system at the swale's inlet point, and the projected hydraulic pathway for redirected stormwater back toward the development's drainage infrastructure. He said Vivian would need 3 to 4 days on site and would produce a sealed report. He asked Glenn whether the site access for a field survey was straightforward. Glenn said he would walk Vivian through the swale the first morning. Paula asked about the redirection pathway's endpoint, where the redirected stormwater would go within the development if the inlet berm redirected it back toward the development's eastern side. Reed said that was precisely what Vivian's topographic and hydraulic analysis would establish, but that his preliminary understanding, based on the development's county-filed grading plan, which he had reviewed in the permit file, was that the development's internal drainage nadir was on the western side of the development, at the lowest elevation point of the parking lot complex, adjacent to the community clubhouse. He said the clubhouse had been constructed in 2015 at a grade approximately 3 feet below the parking lot's average elevation, which meant it sat at the bottom of the development's internal drainage catchment. If the inlet redirection directed water back toward the development rather than into the swale, the path of least resistance on the development's internal grade pointed toward the clubhouse. Paula said, "I want that in the sealed report." Reed said it would be. After the call, Glenn sat at the kitchen table and looked at the drainage logbook. 46 years of entries, the last 7 with standing water on the northern pasture in almost every column. He thought about the concrete berm and the 12-inch pipe and the board meeting in March 2017, where someone had looked at a $38,000 correct solution and a $14,000 cheaper one, and had chosen the cheaper one without asking whether the cheaper one was legal or whether the adjacent property's owner had anything to say about it. He thought about the clubhouse, a building he had seen constructed in 2015 from his northern pasture observation point, the grading crew establishing its foundation at the development's lowest point, the parking lot sloping toward it from 3 sides. He thought about what the path of least resistance looked like when 38 acres of impervious surface runoff was redirected back toward the place it had come from. He had spent 30 years in stormwater systems. He knew exactly what water did when it was pointed downhill. Nadia had received no reply to her second email to Cheryl. She had waited 10 days and sent a third. The same question, the same request for a permit number, the same sent timestamp visible on the chain. No reply. She had printed all 3 emails and added them to the folder. Then she had pulled the state's impervious surface discharge regulations from the State Environmental Agency's public database. The same regulations Reed was now citing in his analysis. The same section, 12.4 framework. She had read the property owner protection clause in subsection 6 with the careful attention of a former permit analyst reading a regulatory provision that had direct relevance to something she already knew was wrong. She had written in her notebook, "Unauthorized discharge. Owner has redirection right. County drainage inspector approval required. No court order needed." She had underlined unauthorized discharge. Owner has redirection right, twice, pressed hard. She had put the notebook in the folder with the emails and the permit search results and the easement index search. She did not know that Reed Calloway was engaged. She did not know that Vivian Cross would be on site in 2 weeks. She did not know that the redirection pathway ran toward the clubhouse at the development's drainage nadir, 3 feet below the parking lot grade. At the bottom of the internal catchment, that 38 acres of impervious surface drained toward on every rainfall event. She knew what the property owner protection clause said. She knew the discharge was unauthorized. She had written it in her notebook and underlined it and put it in her bag. She was waiting to see what Glenn Harker did next. Vivian Cross arrived Monday morning at 7:30, her field truck loaded with the total station, the flow measurement equipment, and the survey rod she used for the kind of drainage corridor work that required both topographic precision and hydraulic analysis. Glenn met her at the farmhouse and walked her to the swale's eastern end, the same walk he had made the morning after every significant storm since 2017, the walk that always ended at the concrete berm and the 12-inch pipe outlet, and the evidence of what the outlet had delivered to his property during the previous event. Vivian stood at the pipe outlet for 3 minutes without speaking. She looked at the outlet's discharge residue, at the berm's construction, at the development's diversion channel on the eastern side, and at the swale's cross-section downstream of the outlet. She was a hydrologist of the kind that fieldwork produces, her knowledge organized not in abstractions, but in physical observations that connected to regulatory frameworks and engineering calculations through a career of translating between the two. She had been in stormwater systems work for 22 years, and she had seen unpermitted drainage modifications of this category before. She noted the pipe diameter, the outlet invert elevation, and the channel geometry on the development side in her field notebook, then crouched and examined the scour pattern on the swale bank immediately downstream of the outlet. The scour indicated sustained high-velocity discharge, the kind of flow pattern that resulted from a concentrated pipe outlet discharging into a channel cross-section that had not been designed to receive it. She spent the first day on the swale's full length, the total station set at 5 survey stations from the eastern collection point to the western outfall at the detention pond, measuring cross-section geometry, bank elevations, and channel slope at each station. She installed a temporary flow gauge at Station 3, the swale's midpoint, and at the pipe outlet to capture the next rainfall event's discharge data. She photographed the bank conditions at each station, the scour damage downstream of the outlet, the erosion at the 2 bank stabilization sections Glenn had constructed in 1983, and the outbuilding at the northern pasture's low point, with its threshold sandbag arrangement and the water stain mark on the interior wall from the current season's intrusion event. The second day, she worked the development's drainage infrastructure from the western perimeter, the diversion channel, the berm, the pipe's connection to the retention basin's overflow path, and the topographic relationship between the development's internal drainage catchment and the western perimeter discharge point. She carried the total station along the development's internal road system to establish the grade profile from the retention basin to the berm outlet, confirming the hydraulic pathway that had produced the 2017 diversion and that would establish the redirection pathway if the diversion were blocked at the inlet. She paid particular attention to the clubhouse site, its foundation elevation relative to the parking lot grade, the slope of the surrounding hardscape, and the drainage pathway from the parking lot's western edge to the clubhouse's northern foundation wall. She shot the foundation elevation from 3 positions and confirmed it against the county's 2014 grading plan, which Reed had included in the document file. The clubhouse foundation sat at 4,206 feet above mean sea level. The parking lot's western edge, the area immediately adjacent to the diversion channel's origin point, sat at 4,209 feet, 3 feet of grade over approximately 180 feet of horizontal distance, a hydraulic gradient of 1.67%, more than sufficient to route surface flow from the diversion outlet area toward the clubhouse foundation without any artificial assistance. The third day Vivian modeled. She sat at Glenn's kitchen table with her field data, the county's grading plan, the development's 2013 stormwater management plan, and the regional rainfall intensity data for the hillside's elevation band. She built the hydraulic model in the sequence she always built drainage models: watershed first, impervious coverage second, design storm parameters third, infrastructure capacity fourth, and overflow pathway last. The model confirmed what the field data had shown her on day one, and what the scour pattern at the pipe outlet had told her when she crouched at it Monday morning. The diversion structure had been designed, to the extent that a $14,000 contractor decision could be called designed, as though the natural swale had unlimited capacity, and as though introducing a concentrated 12-inch pipe discharge from 38 acres of impervious surface into a natural channel that had been managing hillside flow from a 12-acre contributing watershed would not change the swale's hydraulic behavior. It had changed it completely. The swale's natural carrying capacity at the channel cross-section geometry the 1982 survey had documented was sufficient for the hillside contributing watershed's runoff during the county's 10-year design storm, approximately 0.8 cubic feet per second peak flow. The development's impervious discharge through the 12-inch pipe during the same 10-year storm event was approximately 2.7 cubic feet per second. Combined, the peak flow at Station 3 during a 10-year event was 3.5 cubic feet per second, 340% of the swale's design capacity. During higher intensity events, the ratio was worse. The December 2020 event that had produced the first outbuilding intrusion had been a 25-year storm. Peak combined flow at Station 3 had been approximately 4.8 cubic feet per second, 500% of the swale's natural capacity, and the resulting bank overflow had been hydraulically inevitable, given the channel geometry. The redirection pathway analysis was straightforward. If a portable berm system blocked the diversion outlet at the swale's inlet, directing the development's artificial discharge back toward the development's western perimeter rather than into the swale, the redirected flow would encounter the natural grade of the development's western edge and follow it toward the drainage nadir. Vivian had shot that nadir on day 2 and had confirmed it against the grading plan. The drainage nadir was the clubhouse foundation. The hydraulic pathway from the diversion outlet area to the clubhouse's northern foundation wall was a 1.67% grade over 180 horizontal feet, with no obstructions, and fully connected hardscape, parking lot surface, entry apron, and landscaping grade providing a continuous flow path. A 12-inch pipe discharging at 2.7 cubic feet per second toward that pathway during a 10-year event would deliver approximately 14 inches of flow depth against the clubhouse's northern foundation wall within the first 2 hours of the event. She wrote it in the sealed report without editorial commentary. The hydraulics said what the hydraulics said. The sealed report was 21 pages, Vivian's state hydrologist certification seal on the cover page, her signature on the findings certification at the back. It covered the watershed analysis, the impervious coverage calculation, the swale capacity assessment, the discharge volume measurement from the flow gauge data captured during a 0.9-inch event that had occurred during her 3-day field period, the design storm modeling, the capacity exceedance calculation, 340% during the 10-year event, confirmed, the 7-year damage record correlation with Glenn's logbook entries, and the redirection pathway analysis with the clubhouse foundation elevation and the hydraulic flow depth calculation. The last exhibit was a site plan showing the redirection pathway in blue, from the diversion outlet, along the development's western perimeter, across the parking lot's western edge, down the 1.67% grade, to the clubhouse's northern foundation wall, annotated with flow depths at each segment for the 10-year and 25-year design storms. She sent the sealed PDF to Reed's office Thursday evening and called Glenn Friday morning to confirm it had been sent. She said the findings were clear and the pathway analysis was definitive. He thanked her. She said she would be available for any proceeding that required her testimony. Reed had the report by Friday morning and had read it before noon. He called Paula and read her the key findings. the 340% capacity exceedance, the clubhouse foundation elevation, the 14-inch flow depth projection. Paula said, "Put it all in the certified response." Reed said it was already drafted. He said he would send the draft to her and Glenn for review before end of day. The draft arrived at 4:15. Reed had written it in 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph established the property and the absence of authorization. Glenn's property was private land. The county's drainage easement index contained no recorded right of drainage, flowage, or stormwater discharge over the parcel. The county's permit index contained no stormwater modification permit for any work on the development's western perimeter in 2017 or any subsequent year. The 2017 concrete berm and pipe diversion structure had been installed without county permit, without recorded easement, and without Glenn's knowledge or consent. The second paragraph established the violation and the damage record. The diversion structure had been discharging impervious surface runoff onto Glenn's private property since April 2017, in violation of County Stormwater Ordinance Section 12.4 and the state's impervious surface discharge regulations. The discharge had produced flooding on Glenn's northern pasture in every significant rainfall event since installation, documented in contemporaneous logbook entries by a licensed civil engineer covering 7 consecutive years of events. The discharge had exceeded the natural swale's design capacity by 340% during 10-year storm events, as established by Vivian Cross's sealed hydrological analysis. The flooding had caused documented property damage, including 2 equipment storage outbuilding intrusions, bank erosion at 2 swale sections, and pasture soil saturation damage. Glenn had provided written notice of these conditions to the HOA in April 2018 and October 2020, both by certified mail, both received and acknowledged. The HOA had taken no remedial action. The third paragraph stated the demand. Glenn required immediate and permanent cessation of the unauthorized discharge, removal of the 2017 diversion structure, and restoration of the natural drainage pattern to the 1982 surveyed condition, completed within 60 days of this letter's certified delivery date. He required full compensation for the documented property damage, the repair costs documented in the logbook entries, and the diminishment of the pasture's productivity attributable to 7 years of periodic inundation. He required the HOA to construct properly permitted stormwater infrastructure on its own property sufficient to manage its full impervious surface discharge without impact on Glenn's property. The fourth paragraph reserved rights. Glenn reserved all rights available to him under County Stormwater Ordinance, Section 12.4, subsection 6, including the right to reject unauthorized artificial discharge onto his property and to redirect it back toward its point of origin, subject to county drainage inspector approval of the redirection plan. The redirection plan had been engineered by a state-certified hydrologist and was being submitted concurrently to the county drainage inspector's office for review. Glenn reserved the right to implement the approved redirection plan if the HOA failed to remove the diversion structure within the 60-day demand period. 4 attachments. The county's 1982 drainage survey certified copy. The county permit index search result showing no modification permit. Glenn's 2018 and 2020 objection letters with certified mail receipts, and Reed's 2-page record summary covering the permit history, easement index search, and regulatory violation citations. Paula read the draft at the kitchen table. She suggested one addition to the 4th paragraph, a specific citation of Vivian Cross's sealed report as the engineering basis for the redirection plan, with the report's finding that the redirection pathway terminated at the development's clubhouse foundation noted explicitly. She said she wanted Cheryl to read that sentence and understand what the redirection plan's implementation meant before she decided how to respond to the demand. Reed agreed and added the sentence. The revised draft arrived at 7 p.m. Glenn read it from first word to last, the same way he read every document he was going to sign or send, not quickly, but completely. He confirmed the factual content against his logbook and his recollection. Every number was correct. Every date was accurate. Every regulatory citation matched what Reed had described on the phone and what Paula had confirmed in her review. He printed it, signed the transmittal letter, and drove to the County Road Post Office Friday morning. He mailed it certified. He kept the receipt. He drove back to the property, walked to the northern pasture, and stood at the swale's edge looking east at the concrete berm. The diversion channel on the development side was visible, the graded cut that had directed the retention basin's overflow toward the pipe outlet since April 2017. Clear sky this week, no rainfall in the forecast for 10 days. The swale was dry at the center line, residual moisture in the bank soil from the current season's events, the scour marks from the last high-flow event still visible on the downstream bank face. He opened his drainage logbook. He wrote the Friday date. He wrote, certified response mailed, demand period, 60 days from delivery, redirection plan, submitted to county drainage inspector concurrent with mailing, awaiting Cheryl Voss's decision. He looked at the entry. Then he wrote one line below it, the same line he wrote at the beginning of every phase of a problem that had been clearly defined and correctly documented. Record complete. Next action. Theirs. He closed the logbook and walked back to the farmhouse. The certified envelope was in the mail system. Vivian's redirection plan was in Dennis Ware's inbox at the county drainage inspector's office. Reed was at his desk. Paula was on her way back to the Capitol. The swale was dry, and the berm was still in the ground, and Cheryl Voss had 60 days to decide what she was going to do with a demand letter that told her, in the 4th paragraph, that the alternative to removing her own diversion structure was watching the county approve a plan that sent her development stormwater to the Clubhouse Foundation. Cheryl signed for the certified envelope Monday morning at the HOA management office, the delivery confirmation slip that Glenn's postal receipt matched on his end. She sat at her desk and opened it, and read the first paragraph and set it down. She had been board president for 5 years, and had managed the drainage question through 2 objection letters and 2 dismissive responses, and had considered the matter settled by the previous board's authorization and by the fact that nothing consequential had happened in 7 years of the diversion's operation. Nothing consequential meant no legal proceeding, no county inspection, no formal administrative action. Glenn had written letters, and she had responded to them, and the diversion had continued operating, and the retention basin had not surcharged, and the 220 units of Millbrook Commons had not flooded. And as far as Cheryl had been concerned, that outcome justified the arrangement. The first paragraph of Reed's certified response told her that her understanding of what had been happening for 7 years and what was about to happen next were 2 different things. She read the second paragraph and understood the flooding documentation and the 340% capacity exceedance finding. She read the third paragraph and understood the 60-day demand period and the removal requirement. She read the 4th paragraph and understood the redirection plan and the county drainage inspector and what the sentence Paula had asked Reed to add said about the Clubhouse Foundation. She called the HOA's general counsel at 9:15. The general counsel handled covenant enforcement, assessment disputes, and contract review, the standard HOA legal matters. He listened to Cheryl's summary of the certified response for 4 minutes and told her this was outside his scope. He said she needed a stormwater and drainage attorney and gave her a referral name. The stormwater attorney was David Schell, 31 years in water law, 2 of them as assistant county stormwater compliance officer before private practice. He had the file by Wednesday morning. Cheryl had sent everything. The certified response, Reed's 4 paragraphs, all 4 attachments, and the HOA's own internal file on the drainage modification, which Cheryl had pulled from the archive, and which contained the 2017 board meeting minutes, with Fenn's dissenting vote, the contractor's 1-page assessment recommending the diversion, and the contractor's completion documentation showing April 2017 installation. She had sent it all because she wanted Schell to understand the full history before he gave her an opinion. Schell called back Thursday afternoon and gave her his opinion without preamble. The modification had no county permit. That was a regulatory violation under the county stormwater ordinance, section 12.4, and was not a matter of interpretation or dispute. It was a documented absence in the county's permit record. The discharge had been ongoing for 7 years onto private property without a recorded easement. That was a continuing trespass under both the state's impervious surface discharge regulations and the common law property rights framework. The property owner had provided written notice twice, certified mail, both received. The property owner protection clause in subsection 6 was directly applicable. Glenn had documented unauthorized discharge, documented written notice, and had now submitted a redirection plan to the county drainage inspector. The county drainage inspector would review the plan under the ordinance's standard and, given the hydraulic findings in the sealed hydrological report, would have no regulatory basis to reject it. Shell's recommendation was immediate removal of the diversion structure and restoration of Glenn's natural drainage pattern. He said removal within 60 days was the only path that foreclosed Glenn's right to implement the redirection plan. He said the prescriptive rights argument that Cheryl had floated in their preliminary conversation, the idea that 7 years of open and continuous use of the swale constituted an established drainage right, was not viable in this regulatory context. Prescriptive drainage rights in the state required open, continuous, and hostile use for the statutory period. But the prescriptive rights doctrine was preempted for stormwater discharge cases by the state's impervious surface discharge regulations, which required a recorded easement regardless of use duration. 7 years of unauthorized discharge did not mature into a legal drainage right. It was 7 years of continuing violation and 7 years of accruing damage. He said, "Remove the structure." He said it clearly and without qualification. Cheryl thanked him, said she would take it to the board, and called the emergency meeting for Friday evening. She had spent Thursday night preparing her position. She had the stormwater attorney's opinion, and she had made the decision not to present it to the board in full. She told herself this was because the attorney's opinion was preliminary, and she wanted the board to consider the full operational context before acting on legal advice that didn't account for the development's drainage requirements. What she meant was that she knew what Shell had said, and she was not going to let it control the outcome if she could construct a board majority around a different position. Her presentation to the board Friday evening lasted 20 minutes. She covered the certified response's demands and described the removal requirement as a demand that would leave 220 units retention basin without overflow relief. The basin would surcharge, she said, and the surcharge would flow uncontrolled through the development's eastern perimeter rather than through the managed diversion. She said 7 years of operational use had established the drainage arrangement as a functioning infrastructure element that the development's residents depended on. She said the adjacent property owner's objections had been addressed by the previous board's authorization and by 2 written responses explaining the arrangement's legitimacy. She did not mention what Shell had said about the permit absence. She did not read the prescriptive rights analysis he had provided. She presented his preliminary engagement as ongoing and said the board should act on its own operational judgment while legal analysis continued. Nadia was at the far end of the board table, with her folder in front of her, the printed permit search results, the easement index search, the 3 unanswered emails to Cheryl, and her notebook open to the page where she had written unauthorized discharge, owner has redirection right, and underlined it twice. She had been listening to Cheryl's presentation with the specific attention of someone who was tracking every gap between what was being said and what the regulatory record contained. When Cheryl finished, Nadia asked 3 questions. She asked whether the board had received a legal opinion from the stormwater attorney. Cheryl said the attorney's review was ongoing. Nadia asked whether the ongoing review included the attorney's assessment of the permit absence. Cheryl said the attorney was reviewing the full regulatory context. Nadia asked whether the board was aware that the county's permit index contained no permit for the 2017 modification. She held up her printed search result, and whether the board had been informed that she had emailed Cheryl twice asking for the permit number and had received no reply. The board looked at Cheryl. Cheryl said the previous board had authorized the modification and that the permit question had been reviewed at the time of installation. Nadia said she had searched the county's public permit database herself and found no record, and that she had asked Cheryl for the permit number 3 times in writing and had received no reply. She placed all 3 printed emails on the table. Cheryl called for the vote. The vote was 4-1 for the second letter, asserting prescriptive drainage rights based on 7 years of open, continuous, and uninterrupted use of the swale, demanding that Glenn accept the ongoing discharge and cease any interference with the established drainage arrangement, and stating that the diversion structure was a permanent infrastructure element that the board had no intention of removing. Nadia voted no. She asked the minute taker to record her dissent in full. She read it aloud herself to ensure it was transcribed accurately. She was voting no because the county permit index contained no permit for the 2017 modification, because she had asked the board president 3 times for the permit number and received no reply, because the state's impervious surface discharge regulations required a recorded easement that did not exist in the county record, because the adjacent property owner had been objecting in writing since 2018, because prescriptive drainage rights were not available under the state's regulatory framework for impervious surface discharge, and because the board was asserting a claim against a property owner whose written objections had begun 5 years before the prescriptive period's statutory minimum, and whose right to redirect under Section 12.4, subsection 6, was documented and applicable. She said the board was being asked to double down on a regulatory violation in response to a demand letter that had correctly identified every element of that violation, and she was not going to vote for it. The minute taker read it back. Nadia confirmed the transcription was accurate and asked for a copy of the minutes before distribution. The second letter went out under Cheryl's signature Saturday morning, sent certified mail to Glenn's address. Glenn picked it up at the post office Saturday afternoon, drove back to the farmhouse, and sat at the kitchen table and read it. Prescriptive drainage rights. 7 years of open and continuous use. Demand that he accept the discharge and cease interference. He read it twice. He called Paula. Paula listened to his summary without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Now we file, and we submit the redirection plan to the county." He had submitted the redirection plan to the county drainage inspector's office, concurrently with mailing the certified response. It had been in Dennis Ware's inbox since the Friday he mailed Reed's letter. The plan was in queue. Dennis Ware's office reviewed redirection plans under the ordinance's standard, and the standard required approval when the underlying discharge was unauthorized and the redirection plan met engineering specifications. Vivian's sealed report met engineering specifications. The underlying discharge was unauthorized. The approval was a procedural matter at this point, not a substantive one. Paula said she would call Reed Monday morning, and they would file the county ordinance enforcement complaint, the state regulatory discharge violation report, and initiate the civil action for 7 years of property damage. She said the prescriptive rights letter was the best outcome they could have hoped for. A board that had received a correct legal opinion from its own attorney and had chosen to assert a legally unavailable doctrine against a documented regulatory violation on the record. Glenn thanked her and ended the call. He opened the drainage logbook and wrote the Saturday date. He wrote, "Second letter received. HOA asserts prescriptive drainage rights. 7 years open and continuous use. Demand, accept discharge, cease interference. Board vote, 4-1. 1 dissent. Demand refused. Redirection plan. County inspector review pending. Approval anticipated. Enforcement complaint and civil action, Monday." He looked at the entry. He thought about Nadia Sef, a name he didn't know yet, a vote and a dissent recorded in board minutes he hadn't read. He thought about the board member who had voted no and read her objection into the official record while Cheryl called for the vote. He thought about what a former county permit analyst's dissent looked like in a legal proceeding when the board's own minutes confirmed that one member had identified every element of the regulatory violation before the board voted to compound it. He thought about the clubhouse. He wrote one final line in the logbook. Redirection plan, submitted Monday. He closed the logbook and set it on the table. Outside the window, the hillside ran east toward the development's roof lines and parking lots, and the concrete berm, and the retention basin that was full and ready and waiting for the next rainfall event to send its overflow west through the 12-inch pipe toward a swale that had never been asked to carry it. The next rainfall event was in the forecast for Wednesday. Reed filed at 9:15 Monday morning. The complaint was 43 pages, 9 exhibits, 3 tracks, and had been drafted with the precision of a drainage attorney who had spent 26 years building cases on the regulatory record, and who understood that this particular record was as complete as any he had worked with. 7 years of contemporaneous documentation by a licensed civil engineer, 2 certified objection letters with delivery receipts, a sealed hydrological report from a state-certified analyst, a county permit index showing an unambiguous absence, and an opposing party who had responded to a correct legal demand by asserting a doctrine that the property owner's own written objections had foreclosed before the prescriptive period had even begun to run. Track 1 was the core violation: 7 years of unauthorized impervious surface discharge onto Glenn's private property. The complaint cited the county stormwater ordinance, Section 12.4's permit requirement, and the state's impervious surface discharge regulations, easement requirement, documented the 2017 installation against both requirements, and attached the permit index search results and the easement index search results as Exhibits 1 and 2. It cited Vivian Cross's sealed report as Exhibit 3, the 340% capacity exceedance, the discharge volume measurements, the 7-year damage correlation. It documented the flooding damage from the logbook entries as Exhibit 4, every significant event from September 2017 through the current season, the 2 2020 outbuilding intrusions, the current season's intrusion, the repair costs, and pasture productivity diminishment. The property damage claim spanned 7 years of accruing injury and was supported by contemporaneous documentation of a quality that left no evidentiary gap for the opposing party to exploit. Track 2 was the demand letter conduct. Glenn's 2018 and 2020 objection letters, Exhibits 5 and 6, had each been received, acknowledged, and responded to with written assertions that the board's internal authorization constituted legal authorization and that an existing natural feature on an adjacent property constituted a usage right. Those responses, Reed argued, were not merely inadequate. They were affirmative misrepresentations of the regulatory framework made to a property owner who had correctly identified a regulatory violation and who had a documented legal right to have it remediated. The HOA's Saturday letter asserting prescriptive drainage rights was Exhibit 7, a document Reed described in the complaint as asserting a legally unavailable claim in direct contradiction of advice the board had received from its own retained stormwater counsel, in response to a demand letter that had correctly identified every element of the regulatory violation, and in full knowledge that the property owner's written objections from 2018 and 2020 had established continuous owner objection for the full duration of the alleged prescriptive period. Track 3 was the prescriptive rights disposal, 2 pages, direct. Prescriptive drainage rights in the state required open, continuous, and hostile use for the statutory period without owner objection. Glenn's 2018 objection letter had been sent certified mail 14 months after the diversion structure's installation. The 2020 letter had renewed and extended the objection. The prescriptive period could not run against a property owner who had been objecting in writing since the 14th month of the alleged use. The prescriptive rights claim was defeated on its face by the HOA's own certified mail receipts, which were attached as Exhibits 5 and 6. Reed noted in the Track 3 summary that the HOA had retained a stormwater attorney whose opinion, based on the regulatory record, was removal, and that the board had voted 4-1 to assert prescriptive rights anyway, over a documented dissent by a board member who had cited the permit absence, the easement absence, and the property owner protection clause in her recorded objection. The dissenting vote and Nadia's recorded objection were Exhibit 8. The county board meeting minutes, publicly available, confirming the vote and the dissent, were Exhibit 9. Paula had read the draft Sunday evening and called Reed with 2 comments. Both were incorporated. The complaint was filed at 9:15, and the service copy was sent certified mail to the HOA's registered agent and to Cheryl's business address simultaneously. Glenn had driven to the county drainage inspector's office at 8 that morning, before the filing, because the redirection plan approval was the action he wanted Dennis Ware to complete first. The plan had been in Ware's inbox since the previous Friday. Ware had read it over the weekend. Glenn sat across from him at 8:15 and answered 3 technical questions about the portable berm system's anchoring specifications and the pipe bypass capacity during high-flow events. Ware had the approved stormwater ordinance, Vivian's sealed report, and the county's own permit index search result in front of him. The review was not a substantive question. The underlying discharge was unauthorized. The redirection plan met engineering specifications, and the ordinance's property owner protection clause was unambiguous in its application. Ware stamped the approval at 9:05 with the notation Reed had anticipated. lawful exercise of property owners' right to reject unauthorized discharge under County Stormwater Ordinance Section 12.4, subsection 6. Glenn thanked him and drove back to the farm. He called Vivian from the truck. She said she could be there Thursday morning at 7. They installed the portable berm system Thursday morning. Glenn and Vivian working the swale's inlet point from 7 to 11. Dennis Ware present as the county inspector of record, standing at the swale's eastern bank with his clipboard and the approved plan, and watching the installation against Vivian's engineering specifications. The portable berm was a modular system, interlocking concrete ballast sections forming a low weir across the swale's inlet. A bypass pipe routed around the weir to maintain natural hillside flow through the channel, while blocking the development's artificial discharge from the diversion outlet, and a surface channel on the development's side of the weir, directing the blocked discharge back along the western perimeter grade. The installation took 4 hours. Vivian confirmed the weir elevation against the approved plan specification at 10:45. Dennis Ware signed the inspection record at 11:02. Installation complete, consistent with approved plan. Glenn walked the redirection pathway after Ware left, from the weir along the surface channel to the development's western perimeter, across the parking lot's western edge, down the 1.67% grade toward the clubhouse's northern foundation wall. The path was exactly what Vivian's site plan had shown. Connected hardscape, continuous grade, nothing between the diverted flow and the clubhouse foundation, except 180 feet of parking lot, at a gradient that water followed without hesitation. He wrote in the logbook Thursday evening, berm installation complete, county inspector present, approved plan implemented, redirection pathway, active. Next rainfall event, forecast Saturday night. The rainfall arrived Saturday at 9 p.m., a 1.8-inch event over 4 hours, the kind of moderate system that the county's 10-year design storm parameters described as a standard significant event. At the swale's inlet, the portable weir held, and the natural hillside flow passed through the bypass pipe into the swale channel as designed. The development's diversion outlet discharged at the pipe, 2.7 cubic feet per second at peak, the same volume Vivian had modeled, and encountered the weir's blocked face. The discharge followed the surface channel back along the western perimeter. It reached the parking lot's western edge at 40 minutes into the event. It spread across the parking lot surface at the 1.67% grade. It reached the clubhouse entry approach at 55 minutes. It reached the clubhouse's northern foundation wall at 1 hour and 10 minutes and began accumulating against the foundation as the event continued and the parking lot shed its surface runoff toward the same drainage nadir. Sunday morning, the standing water against the clubhouse's northern foundation wall was at 14 inches, exactly the flow depth Vivian's 10-year storm model had projected, the number Paula had asked Reed to put in the certified response's 4th paragraph, so that Cheryl would understand what the redirection plan's implementation meant before she decided how to respond. Cheryl had not removed the diversion structure. The 14 inches was the answer to that decision. The clubhouse parking lot was a reflecting pool from the entry approach to the foundation's base. The decorative landscaping along the foundation's north face was submerged. The entry walk was under 6 inches of water. 3 residents who had arrived for Sunday morning activities had photographed the scene from the parking lot's dry eastern margin and posted to the community forum before 9 a.m. The photographs were clear: standing water, the foundation wall, the entry approach, the parking lot surface showing the drainage path and the mud line tracking from the western edge. One photograph caught the surface channel along the western perimeter in the background, the concrete weir visible at the swale's inlet point, the redirection pathway made visible by the mud deposit on the parking lot surface, running in a direct line from the channel outlet to the clubhouse. The forum thread had 200 replies by noon. Half the replies were residents asking what had happened. A quarter were residents who had noticed the drainage problem before and were connecting the current event to previous observations. Nadia posted at 12:40 with 2 sentences. The county's permit database was publicly searchable at the county website's permit index link, which she included. There was no stormwater discharge permit for the 2017 drainage modification in the county record. The thread went to 340 replies by 3 p.m. Cheryl called an emergency board session for Friday at 5. The second rainfall event was in the forecast for Tuesday, 96 hours out. Another 1.5 to 2-inch system, another full discharge event through the weir, another 14 inches against the foundation, while the redirection pathway was active. The $14,200 remediation, the water extraction, the foundation inspection, the entry approach cleaning, and the landscaping assessment had been contracted Monday and completed by Wednesday. The HOA's insurance carrier had been notified and had sent a field adjuster, who had asked one question before anything else. What is the source of the water intrusion? Cheryl had said it was a drainage redirection by the adjacent property owner. The adjuster had asked whether the redirection was authorized. Cheryl had said it was being disputed. The adjuster had written, "disputed drainage redirection," adjacent property on his form, and said the carrier would investigate before confirming coverage for any claim arising from the redirection. Shell had called Cheryl Wednesday afternoon. He had heard about the Clubhouse event through the county's public record. The inspection report for the berm installation had been filed by Dennis Ware and was publicly accessible. He told Cheryl the redirection had been county approved, that the county inspector had been present at installation, and that the approval notation read lawful exercise of property owner's right to reject unauthorized discharge under County Stormwater Ordinance Section 12.4, subsection 6. He said the carrier's disputed characterization was not going to hold because the redirection was not in dispute. It was a county-approved regulatory action. He said the second rainfall event in Tuesday's forecast would produce the same outcome. He said the diversion structure needed to come out before Tuesday. Cheryl called the emergency board session for Friday. Nadia arrived at 5 with 2 documents, both from the HOA's own files, which she had accessed as a board member through the management office's document archive. The first was Glenn's 2018 objection letter, certified mail receipt attached, addressed to the then president and forwarded to the HOA's file without action beyond the dismissive response. The second was her own email to Cheryl. The first one, sent the day after she had pulled the permit file in 2022, asking for the permit number, time-stamped, with the blank space below it where a reply had never appeared. She set them on the table at the center, in front of Cheryl's seat, without comment. The board looked at the 2 documents, the 2018 objection letter, the unanswered email from 2022. Between them, the full duration of the board's knowledge of the problem and its regulatory character. 4 years of a board president who had known there was a permit question and had not answered the question, and 6 years before that of a modification installed without permit, without easement, and without the adjacent property owner's knowledge. Outside, the clubhouse foundation wall was dry for the moment, the remediation complete, the surface clean, the landscaping replanted. The second rainfall event was in Tuesday's forecast. The portable weir was in the ground at the swale's inlet, county stamped, county inspected, and fully operational. The water didn't care about the board meeting. It went where the grade sent it. Cheryl's resignation letter was 3 sentences, dated Sunday morning, delivered by email to the board's management account, and copied to each board member. She said she was stepping down effective immediately, that the board should appoint an interim president from its current membership, and that she wished the community well. She did not mention the clubhouse. She did not mention the certified response or the complaint or the portable weir. 3 sentences and a signature, the brevity of someone who had decided that explanation was not available to her. Nadia read the email at 8:45 Sunday morning and sat with it for 20 minutes before she called the other board members. She confirmed the resignation with each of them, confirmed that the board's bylaws permitted interim appointment by majority vote of the remaining members, and confirmed that each of them would support her assumption of the interim presidency. None of them objected. The vote was conducted by email at 10:15. She was interim president by 10:30. She called Reed Calloway at 1 p.m. Reed had the complaint filed and the 3 tracks active. He had the county-approved redirection plan and the berm installation inspection record. He had 7 years of documented flooding damage and a sealed hydrological report and a board meeting minutes exhibit showing a 4-to-1 vote to assert a legally unavailable doctrine over a recorded dissent that had correctly identified every element of the regulatory violation before the vote was taken. He had, in short, the complete record of a case that had no defensible position for the opposing party, and that would cost the HOA in legal fees, damage liability, and continued remediation expense every week it remained unresolved. Nadia introduced herself and said, No contest on all 3 tracks. Full settlement. What does Glenn need? Reed said he would call Glenn and call her back. He called Glenn at 1:30. Glenn was at the kitchen table with the logbook open. Reed said Nadia Sef had assumed the interim presidency, that the HOA was prepared to settle all 3 tracks without contest, and that Nadia had asked what Glenn needed. Glenn said he would tell him, and Reed could write it up. He had been thinking about it for 7 years, in the precise sense that every logbook entry and every certified letter and every documented event had been organized around the question of what a complete resolution looked like. He knew the answer in the same way he knew the hydraulic capacity of the swale and the grade of the parking lot, from measurement and documentation and careful professional attention to what the record required. 5 terms. First, removal of the 2017 diversion structure, the concrete berm, the pipe, the diversion channel on the development side, and restoration of Glenn's natural swale to the condition documented in the county's 1982 certified drainage survey. The restoration was an engineering specification, not a general obligation. Vivian would certify the completed restoration against the 1982 survey's channel geometry and bank elevations. The HOA would pay for the restoration and for Vivian's certification inspection. Second, full compensation for 7 years of documented flooding damage. The equipment storage outbuilding repair costs from both the 2020 intrusions and the current season's event. The pasture remediation cost for the saturated soil sections that had lost productivity since 2017. The erosion restoration at the 2 bank stabilization sections the high flow events had damaged, and the value of the diminished pasture productivity across 7 seasons. The logbook had every number. Reed would calculate the total against the documented record, and Nadia's board would write the check. Third, the HOA would fund and construct properly permitted stormwater infrastructure on its own property, engineered by a state-certified stormwater engineer to handle the full impervious surface discharge from 220 units without impact on Glenn's property or his drainage corridor. The infrastructure design would be submitted to the county for permit review before construction began. The construction would be completed within 18 months of settlement execution. The county would inspect and certify the completed infrastructure. The HOA would bear all engineering, permitting, and construction costs. Fourth, a recorded acknowledgement in the county's official records that Glenn's property carried no drainage easement, that no right of drainage discharge over his parcel had ever been granted, and that the HOA had no right, present, historical, or future, to discharge impervious surface runoff onto his property or into his drainage corridor. The acknowledgement would be recorded under both parcels' numbers in the county's easement index, so that any future title search would find it without ambiguity. Fifth, formal recorded withdrawal of the prescriptive drainage rights claim, the assertion from the Saturday letter, filed in the county's official record and noted in the complaint's resolution documentation. Reed would ensure the withdrawal was explicit, complete, and recorded in a form that foreclosed any future reassertion. Reed wrote all 5 terms as Glenn described them. When Glenn finished, Reed said Vivian Cross had called him that morning with a recommendation. He related. Vivian's recommendation was a 6th term, a permanent drainage monitoring clause, requiring the HOA to submit annual stormwater compliance reports to the county drainage office, covering the retention basin's performance, the permitted stormwater infrastructure's condition, and any drainage modification or maintenance work conducted during the year. Glenn to be named as a notified party on each annual submission, meaning the county would send him a copy of every annual report filed by the HOA, and any compliance deficiency identified in a report would trigger notification to Glenn automatically. Glenn said yes before Reed finished the sentence. He said add it. Dennis Ware had been thinking about the county permit office's 2014 approval since he had stamped the redirection plan and stood at the swale's inlet watching Glenn and Vivian set the portable weir. The development's 2014 development permit had been approved by the county's permit office with the stormwater management plan attached. The plan that described the retention basin sized at the lower range of adequacy for the impervious load. The plan that Glenn's 2012 comment letter had flagged as marginal. The permit office had approved it without independent verification of the basin's adequacy for the full contributing watershed load. The undersized basin had been the origin of the 2017 diversion. If the basin had been correctly sized in 2014, the 2017 modification would never have been proposed, because the basin would have managed its design load without surcharging. He called Nadia on Wednesday and told her the county permit office had accepted the 2014 development permit without verifying the retention basin's adequacy for full impervious surface load. He said it was an administrative record deficiency, not a violation finding, but a documented gap in the permit review that the county's own records should reflect. He said an administrative correction filing would put the deficiency on the record and would inform the county's review standards for future development permit applications. Nadia filed the administrative correction herself before the week was out. The same Thursday, Glenn signed the settlement agreement, working from the county's public administrative correction form and citing Dennis Ware's finding. The 2012 comment letter Glenn had filed with the Planning Commission and the hydrological analysis from Vivian's sealed report demonstrating the basin's inadequacy for the combined contributing watershed load. She filed it under the development's parcel number and under the county permit office's 2014 review record. The county's administrative record would reflect it permanently. Glenn signed Thursday at Reed's office the settlement agreement, the recorded acknowledgement, the prescriptive rights withdrawal, and the monitoring clause instrument. Reed filed the recorded documents with the county the same afternoon. The complaint was withdrawn with the filing confirmation attached. The matter was resolved in the county's record by end of business Thursday. He drove home Thursday evening and set the logbook on the kitchen table and did not write in it. The entries would come in the morning, after the berm was out. He was at the Swales Inlet Friday before dawn, the sky still dark at the eastern hillside, the air cold and still in the way that early November mornings in the northern foothills were cold and still. The portable Weir's concrete ballast sections, holding the development's dry season flow back from the Swale Channel with the same quiet indifference they had shown to every wet season event since October. He worked the removal in the sequence Vivian's plan specified. Bypass pipe out first, then the ballast section starting from the Swale's center line. The surface channel on the development side filled and graded smooth. The work took 2 hours. The last ballast section came out as the sky was beginning to lighten at the eastern ridge. The Swales Inlet filled to its natural flow, the hillside contributing watershed's base flow moving west through the channel in the shallow, steady current that 40 years of observation had established as the Swale's normal condition. 3 to 4 inches of depth at the center line, water clear over the gravel bed. Bank faces intact. The development's diversion outlet sat dry above the Swale's eastern bank, the berm gone, the pipe disconnected on the development's side under the HOA's contractor crew that had been on site since 7 a.m., beginning the diversion structure's removal. Glenn watched the natural flow settle into the channel and find its grade and move west toward the detention pond the way it had moved west for the entire 40 years he had owned the property, and the 40 years before that when his father had owned it. He stood at the inlet for a few minutes. The eastern hillside was in early light. The swale ran clear. The contractor crew was working at the berm site, the concrete breaking up under the jackhammer, the pipe coming out in sections. He turned and walked back to the farmhouse. He opened the logbook at the kitchen table. He wrote, "Natural drainage restored, 6:31 a.m. Swale, operational. Unauthorized discharge, ceased. Matter closed." Paula called that evening. She asked how the swale looked. He said it looked like it looked the year he bought the property. She said she'd drive up in 2 weeks. He said the guest room was ready. Before he went to bed, he opened the county drainage inspector's scheduling portal and booked Dennis Ware's office for the annual drainage inspection, first week of November, the same slot he had used every year since 1986. The booking confirmed at 10:47 p.m. He closed the laptop and left the logbook open on the kitchen table. The swale was running west in the dark outside. 46 years of entries in the logbook behind it, 1 sentence added this morning, and the matter closed in the same record that had built it, documented it, and outlasted every decision made against it.